And without further ado, I'm going to introduce Miss Ellen Rowe.
Put my sound on, and we'll do a sound check here again if you can hear me. If you just click on the little smiley face and give me some idea that I'm coming through out there. Thanks, Kathy. I appreciate it. Thanks, Kristen. Okay, we're going to go right ahead and move forward. The topic is leading through change, and begin by sculpting the learning organization. And sculpting the learning organization is in italics because it's the title of a book. So just in case you were wondering, that's why. And I'm going to refer to that book along the way as I do the presentation. Environmental influences often stimulate organizational change. These influences include changes in technology. This requires new ways of thinking to work more effectively, enhanced by the benefits of computers and other technology. In order to maintain a competitive edge in the marketplace and its growing globalizational structure, it is essential that an organization realizes and responds to rapid shifts in the need for products and services. Changes occurring halfway around the globe require continuous information for competitors to understand possible responses and related consequences. Organizations realize that for survival in this rapidly changing environment, change is a constant and must be considered. They must become a learning organization and be flexible. The academic fields of social psychology and sociology provide general theories of change in relation to individuals and groups. The unwillingness or inability to change by individual staff members constitutes a significant barrier to organizational change. Think for a minute, and what are some things that for you serve as barriers for you to change? So if you just think about what are some barriers for individuals to change, and if you'd enter those in the chat box, I'd really appreciate it. What might be some barriers for individuals to change? Comfortable habits, time, buying into your own oppressions, fear of time loss, fear of leadership challenge. Good, good. All good. No natural stopping point for ongoing projects. Okay. We've hit on quite a few with your suggestions. Just want to be sure that we include items like habit, dependency, fear of the unknown, we had that, fear of time, along with security and economic factors, all serve as barriers for individuals to make change. At the group level, social exchange theory suggests that groups within an organization will respond to changes in terms of perceptions of power, advantage, and disadvantage. Group responses to change can be either passive or active, and may include resistance, opposition, acceptance, acquiescence, and leaving. Early interest in organizational change and development has more recently given rise to the studies of organizational learning. The extent to which an organization learns is thought to be related to both structural factors, mechanisms and procedures that allow the organization to systematically collect, disseminate, and use information, and cultural factors, including shared professional values, leadership, and vision. Organizations are able to gain knowledge or learn by synthesizing the knowledge of individual members. The learning organization literature offers substantial information related to barriers of change. The concept of a learning organization recognizes that the capacity to learn both individually and collectively is a function of creating a learning culture that is different from the prevailing culture. In a learning culture, it is natural for humans to behave as proactive problem solvers and learners. A complex blend of individualism and groupism is evident. It happens at all levels of the organization. Individuals learn as part of their daily activities, particularly as they interact with each other in the outside world. Groups learn as their members cooperate to accomplish common goals. The entire system learns as it obtains feedback from the environment and anticipates further changes. At all levels, newly learned knowledge is translated into new goals, procedures, expectations, role structures, and measures of success. Peter Senge was one of the early leaders in defining the concept of a learning organization focused on systems thinking. Problems that organizations confront today come from past learning. To dissect problems in order to analyze the parts and determine needed changes, thus gaining an understanding not just for fragmented parts of the problem, but how the parts interact as a whole in varying environments. For Senge, learning organizations create a culture where lifelong learning is encouraged to develop the capacity of the people to reach their desires, where new patterns of thinking are encouraged, and where people learn how to learn together. This is a model of organizational learning developed by Watkins and Marsick, authors of that book that I referred to at the beginning, identifying learning that takes place at the individual, team, or group and organizational level. Graphically, the model is displayed as two intersecting triangles. The lower triangle, forming the base of the framework, portrays the individuals that comprise the organizations. The upper triangle, which is inverted, portrays the organizational structure and culture established by the organization. Learning in teams at the point of the intersecting triangles is a way to bring together the personal vision of individuals and the corporate organizational vision. They have a pivotal role in bringing together the individuals who create new knowledge and the actions that create the movement toward the organizational vision. Learning is increasingly complex as we move from the lower triangle through the point of intersection and on to the upper triangle. Within the framework, Watkins and Marsick identify 7 action steps that they call action imperatives. Each imperative defines a learning strategy essential to the total concept of a learning organization, such as to create continuous learning opportunities, to promote inquiry and dialogue, to encourage collaboration and team learning, to establish systems to share and capture learning, to empower people toward a collective vision, to connect the organization to its environment, and to provide strategic leadership for learning. Organizational learning is transformational learning and helps organizations understand and overcome the changes impacting them. If an organization is to become a learning organization, these 7 dimensions should be well represented in the culture of the organization. Let's take a closer look at these 7 action imperatives and make some personal assessments about how active they are within our organizations. Create continuous learning opportunities. This imperative, as defined, is learning designed into work so that people can learn on the job. Opportunities are provided for ongoing education and growth. Confessor and Copps, in their late 1990s writing, identify 4 types of workplace learning: formal, non-formal, informal, and self-directed. Self-directed learning places control of learning solely in the hands of the learner. Control of both what is learned and the process of learning. Individuals are encouraged to actively engage through open communication with managers to assume responsibility for their learning. Managers serve as facilitators for the learning process, communicating opportunities, both planned, unplanned, and flexibility, organizing work time to support individuals in their selected learning endeavors. Related to this imperative is a consideration of learning choices and how to seek after needed information and skills. The literature talks about the importance of active learning, learning by doing, which encompasses a set of skills for learning to learn, which is identified as learning management. The concept is labeled to draw a close connection to the well-accepted concepts of time management and stress management, each associated with an identifiable skill set. Watkins and Marsick developed the Dimensions of Learning Organization Questionnaire in 1997. I will use some of the questions from this instrument to help us reflect on the 7 action imperatives described in their model. As a participant on this webinar, as Lindsay indicated, we've got A, B, C, and D underneath the list of participants, and I'm going to ask you to think about how your organization supports and uses learning at the individual, team, and organizational level. So I'll ask you to respond to each of the items by determining the degree to which this is something that is or is not true of your organization. If the item refers to a practice which rarely or never occurs, you would choose a score of A. If it is almost always true of your organization or work group, you would choose a score of D. There's no right or wrong answers, only your perception of where things are at this time for your organization. So let's look at the first bullet. In my organization, people openly discuss mistakes in order to learn from them. And I'll ask you to choose A, B, C, or D. If it almost never occurs in your organization, you would choose A. If it almost always occurs in your organization, you would choose D. Or if it's somewhere in between B and C. So go ahead and select. In my organization, people openly discuss mistakes in order to learn from them. How would you think about your organization? Go ahead and make a choice. I'd like to look at a couple of bullets under each of the 7 imperatives, so I'm going to ask you to make your choices a little faster so that we can move through this. But a lot of folks are choosing, about 30% are choosing on the positive side, almost always side of the continuum here. So let's clear this poll, and let's think about the last bullet. In my organization, people view problems in their work as an opportunity to learn. How true is that in your organization? And you would choose A, B, C, or D from your perspective. In my organization, people view problems in their work as an opportunity to learn. What do you think?
And in case you're having trouble finding where you make that selection, under the participant box where everyone is listed, your names are listed, there is A, B, C, or D to the right underneath that screen. So that is where you would click on your response.
Underneath that screen. So that is where you would click on your response.
Go ahead and post it. Okay, so we're well onto the almost always side here with about 70% of you logging in on that end of the continuum. Okay, let's move on to the next imperative in the model. Promote inquiry and dialogue. Ardress presents two types of reasoning, defensive and productive. Productive reasoning is characterized by three assumptions. Reasoning, or making inferences, is key activity in designing and implementing action. The second, learning to make inferences explicit and to test their validity in practice, is important to effective action. And third, designing activity to help self and others understand what is going on around them is essential to initiating and sustaining action or change. This type of reasoning requires people to assess their assumptions and judgments against changing conditions caused by an external environment. Kurt Lewin, identified by some as the father of action research and pioneer in the field of organizational social psychology, outlined a three-phase model of organizational change: unfreeze, move or transition for change, and refreeze to stabilize or institutionalize the change. In an open system, organizations are like living creatures. The unfreezing phase often requires an external catalyst to initiate the change. All the while, the organization as a living organism will resist and work to maintain the more comfortable, steady state of status quo. Chaos and anger are expected, and management needs to respond with open communication, engaging individuals in dialogue, responding to the questions and concerns. So let's look at a few of the statements that would be used on the dimensions of the Learning Organization Questionnaire to assess this particular action imperative. So again, you're going to choose A, B, or C, or D, and let's look at the first one. In my organization, people listen to others' views before speaking. Where do you think your organization fits on this continuum? Almost never? Then you'd give it an A. Almost always? A D. Or someplace in between. In my organization, people listen to others' views before speaking. Okay. We've got about 50% responding on the almost never end of that continuum, which would raise some concerns, obviously. Okay, let's try another one. In my organization, people are encouraged to ask why, regardless of rank. So I'll ask you to select again, A, B, C, or D. In my organization, people are encouraged to ask why, regardless of rank. Okay, and here we've moved to the almost always side with the responses. We've got about 25% saying C and another 25%, so 50% on that almost always end of the continuum. Okay. Let's look at the next action imperative, which is encourage collaboration and team learning. Lawson and Shane tell us that total quality teams spend most of their meeting time engaged in these activities: defining problems, identifying solutions, and examining feedback on continuous improvement toward problem solving. The action research model that Kurt Lewin proposed was based on the thought that individuals would be more committed and take action that is more effective by actually working through the steps together. These steps include analyzing a collective identified problem, reflecting on the data, crafting possible solutions, putting a potential solution into practice, reflecting on the results, and revising the solution to be more effective with enhanced productive results. The focus is putting all of the elements of effective problem solving into action with groups or teams. applying the concept of synergy to problem solving. So let us look at some of the questions that might assess where the organization is in relation to this action imperative. So let's start with the first one. In my organization, teams focus both on group tasks and how well the group is working. Focus both on group tasks and how well the group is working. This question sort of reflects back to our webinar on team leadership, and we talked about task and relation were both really important issues of team functioning. Okay. Got some split here between B and C, where we have the largest number of responses. There's 11 people on the webinar, and we've got about 11 responses, so that's good. Thank you very much. And let's look at another one of these questions. In my organization, teams are rewarded for their achievements as a team. Think about your organization and answer that question, A, B, C, or D. In my organization, teams are rewarded for their achievements as a team. I'm not using all the questions for each of the imperative that come from that questionnaire, just a few to give us a flavor of what types of things you might consider assessing for in that action imperative. Okay, so we got about 27% saying almost never, and then spread out across that grid. So that one shows us a little more variety in response. Something to consider in sculpting a learning organization, and a group that's flexible and able to deal with change. Okay, and let's do the last bullet for this one as well while we're here. So I'll ask you once again, in my organization, teams are confident that the organization will act on their recommendations. A, B, C, or D. In my organization, teams are confident that the organization will act on their recommendations. Okay, so we've got a lot on the almost never end of this continuum, and that happens in organizations, and all of these bullets make up a really effective collaboration and team learning atmosphere. So it's important that all of them would be present. So we had some different responses on these three bullets, and that's something to think about and consider. Okay. Whoops. Got ahead of myself. Okay, establish systems to capture and share learning. Team psychological safety is described as a team climate characterized by interpersonal trust and mutual respect in which people are comfortable being themselves. It is so essential to establishing a risk-taking environment for team members to identify mistakes, ask reflective questions, moving the team to a state of new knowledge. Meeting minutes must be complete, capturing the shared learning created from an error and open dialogue that follows. If a safety net is not in place, neither the sharing of the individual mistakes in the thinking or action, nor the subsequent reflective dialogue will bring that knowledge into a context for greater understanding. Gavin's definition of a learning organization clearly captures the essence of this imperative when he states, "A learning organization is an organization skilled in creating, acquiring, interpreting, transferring, and retaining knowledge, and at purposely modifying its behavior to reflect new knowledge and insights. Stages of learning include inquiring information, quality data collection, interpreting information, identifying the meaningful generalizations from the acquired information, and applying information, putting the learning into action, practicing new behaviors. So let's look at this action imperative to create systems to capture and share learning. And we've got a few bullets here, so let's look at those. The first one is, my organization uses two-way communication on a regular basis, such as suggestion systems, electronic bulletin boards, or town hall open meetings. And would you select A, B, C, or D as you think about your organization? In my organization uses two-way communication on a regular basis, such as suggestion systems, electronic bulletin boards, or open hall town meetings. Okay, got a 36% on C here and another 9% on D. So this one is pulling a little to the almost always side of the continuum. Of course, this assessment you're making an assessment on your own organization. The power of this tool, of course, is to apply it to an organization, which I did once upon a time when I did my dissertation, and you can read all about that too. Okay, let's look at the next bullet. My organization maintains an up-to-date database of employee skills. A, B, C, or D? What do you think? My organization maintains an up-to-date database of employee skills. Do we know what people are good at? Okay. Early indication is that no, we don't. Okay. So we got about 63% saying almost never. Okay, and let's look at the last bullet. I have to move that so I can see it. My organization measures the results of the time and resources spent on training. What do you think? A, B, C, or D? My organization measures the results of time and resources spent on training. Okay. And we've got a lot of people, almost 50%, ringing in as B as the answer on the almost never side of the continuum. Okay. So here again, you would need these three, and my recollection is this imperative has 7 questions that are associated with it. So it looks at all elements of how to capture and share learning. All right. The next imperative is empower people toward a collective vision. Senge defines personal mastery as the practice of continually clarifying and deepening our personal vision, of focusing our energies, of developing patience, and of seeing reality objectively. It implies that each has a responsibility to pursue learning opportunities to ensure personal development continues. He encourages moving personal mastery to a discipline, and we integrate into our life. Individuals who seek personal mastery have the desire to create something new, something that has value and meaning to people. In doing so, individuals will continually clarify what is important to use and spend less time coping with problems along the way that may lead us from that important path. Continual learning is also a key to personal mastery, and it brings clarity to what we see as current reality. What is important here is keeping our eyes on the target or the vision and learning or developing skills to bring the target into focus, making it more current reality than it is a vision. Transformational leaders helped to bring clarity and focus on the vision, then support and monitor learning to move the organization toward that vision. So let's look at some assessment pieces on this action imperative. And again, A, B, C, or D. My organization recognizes people for taking initiative. What do you think? My organization recognizes people for taking initiative. How do we treat those risk takers? Okay. 54% are saying to the almost always side of this continuum. That's a really good thing. And let's look at the next bullet. My organization invites people to contribute to the organization's vision. My organization invites people to contribute to the organization's vision. What do you think? A, B, C, or D? Okay. We've got about 54% responding on the positive side and about 36% saying almost always. And a lot of the participants on this particular webinar today are from UVM Extension, and we just did a visioning process. So that probably tells us why this particular question scored so highly. Let's look at the next one. My organization gives people control over the resources they need to accomplish their work. What do you think? My organization gives people control over the resources they need to accomplish their work. A, B, C, or D? Okay, I've got about 41% saying almost always. Very strong indication of empowering people toward a vision. Okay, and let's take this last one just for fun. My organization supports employees who take calculated risks. My organization supports people who take calculated risk. A, B, C, or D? Okay, again, very strong in that almost always side of the continuum. Okay, I'm going to move on to the next action imperative, which is to connect the organization to its environment. Senge described the use of an exercise called the wall to teach the concept of convergent problems, those that have a solution, and divergent problems, those that have no correct solution. In the exercise, a wall is covered with blank paper, and the group working together tries to identify all the feedback relationships with a particular problem. Those who rationalize the lack of insolvability of some problems may identify the exercise as pointless and a waste of time. Others focus on the time limitation of the exercise and are confident that with enough time the solution can be mapped out. Yet others recognize the problem as insolvable and can accept the divergent problem for what it is. The search becomes one for understanding instead of the right answer, We are free to pursue a creative process involving rational think and so much more. When we look at the connections between the organization and its environment, several divergent problems surface, like work and family balance, or job satisfaction, or affirmative practices in determining what is equitable and fair. For these problems, there may be no correct solution. These problems, Senge suggests, are best addressed with openness and freedom. We commonly think of freedom as freedom from constraints, but here Senge calls us to focus on freedom to create the results that we truly desire. Okay, let's look at a couple questions that we might use to assess where the organization is on this particular imperative. So, again, using A, B, C, or D, my organization considers the impact of decisions on employee morale. What do you think? A, B, C, or D? My organization considers the impact of decisions on employee morale. Okay, we've got about 45% on the almost never end of that continuum, which of course would raise flags for me, and I'm sure it does for you, who happen to answer on that side of the continuum. And let's look at the second bullet. My organization encourages people to get answers from across the organization when solving problems. What do you think? A, B, C, or D? My organization encourages people to get answers from across the organization when solving problems. Okay, this time we've got 53% on the almost always side of the continuum. So here again, this particular imperative has, I believe, 6 questions to assess where the organization might be toward connecting the organization to its environment. So the instrument itself is much fuller than what we're showing and using here. Okay. And the last imperative is use leaders who model and support learning at the individual, team, and organizational level. Some authors, including Day, draw a clear delineation between leader development and leadership development. While leader development focuses on the individual acquiring skills and knowledge, intrapersonal competence, to enhance their human capital, leadership development is built on a foundation of mutual trust and focuses on building interpersonal competence to enhance the social capital of the organization. Leader development usually occurs in trainings and development sessions, while leadership development is more effectively taught through action learning, or learning in the context of work tied to organizational strategic goals. Learning organizations demonstrate a focus on both leader development and leadership development. These organizations encourage individuals to gain skills and knowledge about being a leader and create a safe environment for individuals to practice leadership in a real-life work context. To quote from Day in his 2001 writings, leadership is developed through the enactment of leadership. And let's look at a couple of questions from the Dimensions of Learning Organization questionnaire and assess our organization. So let's look at the first one. And in my organization, leaders share up-to-date information with employees about competitors, industry trends, and organizational directions. What do you think? A, B, C, or D? In my organization, leaders share up-to-date information with employees about competitors, industry trends, and organizational directions. And we've got about 53% responding almost always. Great. Let's look at the next bullet. In my organization, leaders mentor and coach those they lead. In my organization, leaders mentor and coach those they lead. A, B, C, or D? Okay. We've got 46% saying C and another 24% saying D. So we're on the positive almost always side for this particular question as well. And let's look at the last bullet. In my organization, leaders ensure that the organization's actions are consistent with its values. In my organization, leaders ensure that the organization's actions are consistent with its values. A, B, C, or D? Okay. And again, we've got about 45% on the almost always side of that continuum, but I think this is a higher percentage for this particular one that we've seen on the almost never side of the continuum. So the B group is getting more, had more votes on this one. Okay. Marsick and Watkins offer a model for grasping the scope of the literature, a framework for assessment, and a foundation for the strategic plan to enhance organizational capacity for change. In short, this model operationalizes a broad literature base, so organizational learning, and relates to the necessary conditions to stimulate change in an organization. So when you think about building change or building the capacity for change and leading through change, I would strongly suggest that you think about beginning by sculpting that learning organization. And with that, I would conclude my presentation, and I would entertain any questions. And Lindsay has been watching in the chat box, and if we have any questions, go ahead and put those in, and she'll scan what's been entered so far, and we can have some discussion about it. So anybody got any questions about what we just put up here? Back to slide 22. Okay. Oh. Is this it? I think 22 is the model. No. 22.
Oh, yes. Okay. And there was some great discussion going on in the chat box, and we do encourage that. I think it helps participants learn from each other, and so if there's any comments you want to make going off of what was said prior, please also enter that in the chat box.
And Anna, I'm happy to put this framework up as a PDF document that you could pull down, so if you don't want to take the time of drawing it out, I can
While
certainly
you're thinking of
that.
questions, I want to point out to you that I entered the link to the evaluation for this webinar in the chat box. If you would do that at your earliest convenience, the building capacity team would very much appreciate it. We do have a question from Suzanne. What are some strategies for encouraging peer leadership?
What are some strategies for encouraging peer leadership?
Well, you can encourage it by creating opportunities for that to happen, and you can do that at the team level creating some working teams, and actually making sure that those teams have all they need to complete the task, and that the products that they produce are used by the organization. Teams that are created for the sake of creating a team, and where the results of their work is not used or appreciated, is not a good thing, and you certainly don't want to do that. But having opportunities for them both to do leader development, learning those skills that are needed, and then leadership development, and creating those opportunities for them to actually practice what they learn, are all ways that you encourage peer leadership. Well, thank you, Marilyn, for joining us.